Hello, and welcome to the nonprofit world, where we highlight organizations and individuals who are passionate about empowering others to make a difference in the life of other people, serving in our communities and around the world. I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean, your host for today's program, and I am excited today to bring back a guest that we had with us not too long ago. He is a former lawyer, he is a singer, and a philanthropist. And I welcome back today Stuart Root.
Nice to be here, thank you.
Welcome to our program again. So glad to have you back with us. Last time we talked about your career as an attorney, and we talked about your life and being raised here in Connecticut and your roots here in Connecticut. And today we're going to talk about something a little different. We're going to talk about your activity in a nonprofit.
Very well. Just a bit of correction, a minor correction. I wasn't raised in Connecticut. I was raised in Ohio.
But you have roots in Connecticut, right?
Yes, I have roots in Connecticut.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Going back to 1640, indeed.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So it was exciting to talk about that.
Yes.
And I know, Stuart, you were involved in more than one nonprofit in the past, yet there was one of those that stands out more than the others, and that is the Harlem School of the Arts.
Correct.
How did you first get involved with that nonprofit?
Well, it was a, how to say, collateral benefit to me. Because I shared an apartment in New York City for a while with a fellow who was on the board. And he would come back evenings with one real estate problem or another that they were facing because they wanted to build a new building. And they had space that they owned, but they had to negotiate with the tenants that were there in residence. And that raised all sorts of knotty little problems having to do with real estate taxes and things that developers normally have to contend with. But this is a group that had no, how to say, on-board experience with that. So the fellow of whom I speak is Peter Swords, Peter Delancey Swords, giving a clue to his revolutionary roots in New York City. He was confronting issues that to me were somewhat mundane, but to him were, and to the rest of the board at Harlem School, were daunting. So I offered my kibitzing to him on those issues, and it didn't take long for him to say, well, why don't you just come to a board meeting, which I was pleased to do. And I was particularly excited, indeed, because this is an opportunity to meet a woman who was famous in my mind, even though she may not have been all that famous to the rest of the world. Fact is, however, that she was more famous in Russia than she was in the United States.
Is that right?
Yes. Dorothy Maynor. Dorothy Maynor was the product of generations of singers and theologians in her family, springing out of I think the East Virginia coast, like so many of the early settlements were. So anyway, and just a word about Dorothy. She made her debut on the national stage with Serge Koussevitzky, legendary conductor of the Boston Symphony. And this is at Tanglewood, at a time when Koussevitzky was still conducting at Tanglewood. As you may know, the Boston Pops really was the handmaiden of another another conductor at Boston, BSO. But Serge Koussevitzky was the granddad of conductors for the symphony. And the Boston Symphony actually had its own tone because Koussevitzky would tune instruments to a sharp A. 440 is the normal vibrations per second, I think, of the sound that a violin will make if it's tuned to an A. Well, Koussevitzky moved that up to 441 or 2, just an edge of sharpness. And that became the hallmark of the Boston Symphony and made Koussevitzky a leader in American music performance. Anyway, he had Dorothy as a soloist when she was, boy, I don't know, she was probably in her early 20s. And I read the review of her, how to say, debut. And Koussevitzky was quoted as saying that her voice was a miracle.
Wow.
And I had no reason to doubt that. The more I knew Dorothy, why, there was a lot of other things that I thought about her that were miraculous as well. Anyway, so Peter was working with Dorothy on building a new building in Harlem. I should also add that just to fill that scene out a little bit, the school was founded by Dorothy in a church that was at roughly 140th and St. Nicholas Avenue, at St. James Presbyterian Church.
And was her husband, he was the pastor there, right?
He was the pastor there, okay. Yeah, Shelby Rooks was his name. And actually, someday or other, a biography ought to be done about the two of them because Shelby himself was a marvelously funny man, great wit. Anyway, Shelby and Dorothy handled the theological and the musical dimensions to that church. And she was a very giving person. And if she were sitting in a group, she was one time with me and my children at the Lincoln Center in the great auditorium at Philharmonic Hall, formerly known as Avery Fisher Hall. You would be aware that there is this magnificent voice coming from someplace. And if you had the right antennae, why, you could go over and you would fasten on to Dorothy because that's where it was coming from. Anyway, Dorothy was magnificent. And she came to the conclusion very early on in her life in Harlem that there was an insufficient arts education available for, in this case, young students. Not to be exclusive of others, but that was the principal focus of her. And she came to that conclusion when Shelby was having a counseling session with a parent and the child that was in the parent's care, but left outside the room, and Dorothy looked after him, and the child became transfixed by the piano. So Dorothy encouraged him a little bit and found that the boy was really gifted.
Now you said young student. How old was he?
This boy, I'm not sure, but I think he probably was 7 or 8, thereabouts. So I never asked her that question. Anyway, suffice to say, he did not have a piano at home. And so she, that set her on a course of soliciting funds for instrumental music. And this was in the early 60s, I guess. And so that evolved into a program at the church, which also had a gymnasium, which lent itself to ballet instruction as well, and other rooms that were used for Suzuki violin playing. Anyway, Dorothy then became a, how to say, a crusader for children education and music. And she founded the school on three principal pillars. One was that to be taken as a student by the school, the parents had to show engagement with their students. That is to say, they had to undertake making time available from their schedule to oversee him or her. That was one pillar. Another one was that the education would be largely, if not entirely, classical music. No feel-good music as such. And thirdly,
no rock and roll.
No, none of that. No, that was all quite foreign to Dorothy, and I won't say it was anathema, but it was not what she wanted those kids to learn. And thirdly, the parents had to contribute something financially to the education. Now, it could be just a token, or it could be more substantial. But for everybody coming to the school had to be a child of a family that was committed to furthering his education in music. And the skin in the game then became whatever the family could afford.
So did they have all the academic curriculum as well as the music?
No.
Okay, so it was just the music that they were focused
music,
on.
but it was music, but an expanded version of the arts, because it was music plus drama.
Okay, theater,
right.
Okay,
all those things tended to, how to say, accrete as the programs expanded. And Dorothy would take great pleasure in featuring groups of these children with their Suzuki violins, miniature violins in effect, and they'd play, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. But all these little kids with these violins playing, and it was a real selling point for her when she went fundraising.
Okay.
Anyway, that all grew in the 60s. And I didn't get involved until I think it was 1971 or so. But I found it all quite thrilling. And this has nothing at all to do with the normal, how to say, things that go on through your mind when you talk about lawyers and people in commerce and being involved in the arts. It was much more personal with me and driven by the examples that I was observing on a regular basis.
So you were invited to come and join a board meeting.
Yes,
and then
that's
did
right.
they invite you onto the board at that point, or were you?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Yes, they did. More than that, it was it was kind of a home run for me because about the second board meeting by Dorothy and Shelby, her husband, took me aside and said they wanted me to be chairman of the board. And their reasoning was that I was a real estate lawyer. Mm-hmm. They were in the course of scouting out what the requirements would be to build a new building in Harlem, adjacent to the church, connected with the church. And it was a sizable undertaking. It was the only building, actually, that was to be built by private funds in Harlem, post-war, I think, that did not have government support.
Okay.
And the whole thing was, as I say, it was quite thrilling. And particularly when you see the kids that were affected by this and how they were affected. I went up to, in the mid-'70s, I went up to St. James, which is the name of the church that housed the school for so many years, for a Sunday service, and to hear Shelby preach. He was a marvelously eloquent man. And he was very persuasive. And after church, why, he asked me if I would join them for Sunday afternoon dinner. Well, I didn't have anything on my schedule, and I was pleased to do that. Well, they wanted to go down to 47th Street and Broadway. That's where the restaurant was, or how? What was it? It was a. It was an Italian. No, it was House of Chen. It was a Chinese restaurant.
Okay.
Chinese restaurant. Anyway, so we got down, and driving south on Lexington Avenue. Shelby was driving, and he turned up. I think it was either 51st or 53rd Street, off of Lexington Avenue. Turned to the right and upgrade a little bit to Park Avenue. I should be more precise about the street, but anyway, it brought us to the corner of St. Bartholomew's Church and Park Avenue. And we were about 4 or 5 cars behind the leader. And from the side door of St. Bart's, out came this man and a woman. I don't remember who came out first, but they were not happy with each other. He spat at her, and she swung at him. And we're looking at this like, shocking, just shocking coming out of St. Bart's, right? And Shelby, without missing a beat, said, "Well, dear, maybe we ought to go back to Harlem where the streets are safe." And that was typical of Shelby's humor. Later that afternoon, we were after dinner, we were driving north on Madison Avenue and passed a very fine china store, and they had on display plates and glasses and other settings featuring silver wheat stalks. There was a cup, a silver cup with silver wheat stalks in it, and plates with silver wheat stalk designs on it, etc. And Dorothy was really enchanted by this, and she said, "Look, Shelby, it's all that silver wheat." And he said, "Oh," he said, "is that what they're making bread out of nowadays? Now, no wonder it's so damned expensive." You know, it was just typical of the wit that he possessed. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
You said you were chairman for
10 years.
For 10 years.
Yes.
And during which time the organization raised enough funds to build a new building.
Yes.
In Harlem.
Yes.
So how did you go about raising those funds?
Well, by the time I became chairman, they had already raised a fair sum, not enough to do the building. But the problem was, the financial problem was that as fast as we raised the money, inflation eclipsed us. Mm-hmm. So it was like a Sisyphean pushing the wheel up the hill, you know, so this was a. It looked how to say. It looked unsolvable because we couldn't control inflation. Nobody could in those days. And there was no end in sight to the constant increase in prices. And we couldn't get ahead of it. Finally, it occurred to a group of us that the way to solve it was to borrow the money, put a lock on the costs, and then proceed with it under those circumstances. The problem with that is that charitable organizations don't like to borrow money.
Right.
One reason is that they find it very difficult to raise funds to pay off the debt. Another way of put it is that donors don't like to give money to pay off charitable debt.
They're looking for future, making their contributions for something in the future rather than something in the past.
Right. That will be rather than was already there.
Already there. Mm-hmm.
Well, we had to swallow hard on that one, but we did. Mm-hmm. And we also enlisted the Ford Foundation. And a couple of banks, and it was a tiered, financing structure. The Bowery Savings Bank, with which I was familiar, was involved. Manhattan Savings Bank was involved. I think Chemical was, Ford itself was helping, and at the end of the decade, we came to a point where we had raised the necessary funds to pay off the debt, largely because Ford Foundation converted loans that they had made to us into gifts. That's
nice.
Yes. It was really spectacular. It was a tribute to Dorothy, really. Mm-hmm. So by 1982 or so, we were sailing clear. We burned the mortgage, big celebration.
I'm sure.
Yes, literally burned the mortgage.
Well, now, did the fact that Dorothy knew some famous people, did that help with the fundraising?
It was enormously helpful, yes. Not only the help for the fundraising, but it was also immensely helpful for the program itself, because she had access to singers and musicians that would welcome the opportunity of helping her. I'll give you one example. She wanted to set up a program where over 3 years, we would raise $300,000. I think that was the target. And give arts instruction to high school children at the rate of about $100,000 a year, cost, or thereabouts. I'm a little uncertain about my figures at this point, but it's been 40 some odd years.
A few years.
Yeah. Anyway, I got a call from Dorothy one day and said that she wanted me to join her to meet with Mr. Paley. And I said, "You mean the CBS chairman?" She said, "Yes. He wants to meet with us."
CBS is in the broadcasting.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
CBS as in Channel 3 and all that.
Okay.
Bill Paley, legendary figure in New York City and national broadcasting. So we met at his office, and it was astonishing to me what he had just hanging on the wall in way of Cézanne and wonderful art in his anteroom. And then we were led into his office where there was just more of the same. Well, this is a little bit overwhelming, but nonetheless, Dorothy laid out the program, and he was quite interested. I'll cut to the chase and say that the upshot was that we got a $300,000 commitment from him to be paid out $100,000 a year, as I recall. And he was sold on it.
And that was your full goal, right? $300,000 for over 3 years.
Yes, that was right. That was right.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, it was amazing.
To get that from one individual or company.
Right. From one donor. Now, there may have been some other people that kicked in on that, but it's clear to me, it was clear to me that Bill Paley was really the major engine for this program, and it worked. For 3 years, we had what was called release time for children, and her message to the education world was that, look, these children need it, and it can be done with the right, community spirit, and she showed them how. And that was, working with her was just an absolute joy.
Now, was this, the School of Arts, is it an after-school program?
Well, partly, yes, but not entirely. That particular program was specifically aimed at release time from school, so the children could get released to go to an arts program.
Okay.
But the school itself was bustling on Saturdays and after school, but it did not offer any diplomas or at that time anyway.
Okay.
I'm not sure what it's doing now. But it was an innovator and a leader in arts education in New York City and I think elsewhere.
Okay. So there are so many different nonprofits, and there's, even in New York, you've got the Juilliard School.
Right.
And the Harlem School of Arts is primarily African American. Even today, it's more than 50%
Yes.
African American, and then a fair percentage of Hispanics, and then
Right.
smaller percentage of others.
Yes.
Looking back, would you do you think you would have chosen a different school over the Harlem School, or I mean, you kind of came across that. by chance.
So quite, yeah, right. It was quite accidental. And if I had to choose one venue, I think I would still choose the Harlem School of the Arts because the people involved were so compatible, and I thought well-intentioned and highly motivated. Now, there may have been others that are just as much so with organizations that I just don't know about. But this was to me, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience to work with creating a program for children where it could be it could produce so much how to say ripples, you know, going out from the pond.
Yeah, I think it's just wonderful. I was just reading, just, you know, a little bit about the history of it earlier,
Yes.
and just loved Dorothy's heart for reaching out and helping the
Yes.
children in the area. So
That's
it was
right.
really wasn't about her at all or about her own musical abilities, but what she
Right.
could offer. It says, I'm just going to read this. Her fervent belief that world-class training in the arts stimulates the child, strengthens the family, and gives pride of ownership to the community.
Right.
And I just think that is just so beautifully put, and it sounds like that's really where her
Yes.
where her heart was.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. She got her how to say views on that not only from working in Harlem and New York, but also traveling in Eastern Europe and Russia, because she found that in those jurisdictions, why the hierarchies had a value, and that's one of the things that impressed her to fold into her principles the requirement that the children be classically taught, because she thought that that was the best and most enduring method of education. And so she came back from Eastern Europe, and thinking, well, we may not like their politics, but boy, they sure do know how to produce stellar musicians and performers. Ballet, for example.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you reconcile working for the bank, doing doing real estate law,
Right,
and being involved in the nonprofit?
Well, it was I don't know. There was a reconciliation be required because how to say, they enhanced each other. The Bowery had an office about 4 blocks north on St. Nicholas Avenue from where the school was. A lot of the people that we dealt with as parents were also customers of the bank. And they were aware of the Bowery's involvement with the school. The chairman of the Bowery was a fellow by the name of Morris D. Crawford. Wonderful, wonderful gentleman and banker. He was a devoted follower of Dorothy's. So he himself was fully supportive of my working with the school. And I asked him before I really accepted the idea of being chairman that would muddy the waters at all with me and the relationship with the bank. I said, no, that's exactly what we'd want you to do. You know.
Good, good. So that kind of maybe fits in a little bit with my next question. How does the concept of corporate social responsibility play into your involvement in the nonprofit world?
Well, obviously, it is a fulfillment of corporate responsibility, but not the motive. It was a byproduct. Now, there are other people who might work with an organization like that and chalk it off to their resume building for they're performing corporate duties responsibly. With me, it didn't happen that way at all. I got slotted in the growth of the school in a way that didn't even dawn on me about whether I am being a responsibly behaving lawyer for a bank. And it was a, well, it's hard for me to explain.
Such a nice blend with your passion for music.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
right.
then your being a lawyer and working with real estate. So it just was a perfect blend.
Well, that's right, right. It wasn't the perfect storm. It was the perfect lull.
Did you see any improvement with, or any change in clientele while you were involved in the Harlem School of the Arts and working at the bank?
No, not particularly. But I really did thoroughly enjoy, how to say, having a leadership responsibility. I remember very early on, my third or fourth year as chairman, we had a black tie dinner at the Plaza Hotel, and Dorothy trotted out these children with their little Suzuki violins, you know, and everybody wept when they played because they were good. Anyway, I remember making the comment or the enunciation that in Dorothy Mainer's house there are many mansions, and these children were the exemplification of that. And that kind of was my guiding light during my time there. See, so many children mature and develop musically, artistically, drama. It really was quite remarkable.
Wonderful to see that. Were you able to bring in any of your friends that you knew, people that you knew, onto the board, or?
No, not that I recall.
No.
Dorothy had her own coterie of, how to say, followers. And she had her own advisory council and people that were interested in the arts. For example, Helena Rodzinski, Arturo Rodzinski's wife, who at that time was living in New York, he had been a conductor in the 1940s of the Cleveland Orchestra, which was around the corner from me. Then there was Wanda Toscanini, Arturo Toscanini's daughter, who was involved. William Warren, Leontine Price. She had just, within a year or two before that, opened Lincoln Center's Metropolitan Opera with Aida
Nice.
in the leading role. She was and Warren and she were at that time married, but they didn't stay married. But and no matter.
That happens.
As I recall, pardon me if I'm wrong about that, but that's what I recall.
So I don't know really how many years it's been since you were on that board, but do you still stay in touch or keep abreast of what's going on with the Harlem School of Arts?
Well, not as much as I'd like to. Being retired and living in Connecticut, why I don't have wheels, and for me to get into New York City, which I haven't done for the last couple of years at least, it just doesn't lend itself to my being able to keep up. But I still follow things. For example, there's an item in the New York Times just within the last couple of weeks about the Harlem School of the Arts getting another large grant from Herb Alpert for renovating the school. It's been 50 years or more since it was built. I might add that this is the second time that Herb Alpert has stepped up to the plate, he and his wife, from California, of all places. They have been magnificent in their generosity and, how to say, vision for the school. This is all taking place on a, how to say, a very solid base, which has had its ups and downs over the last 20, 30 years. After Dorothy left and Betty Allen came traipsing through, and they had one person that I met, and I don't remember what her last name was, but her name was Yvette, I think. Stunningly good-looking woman who was for I don't know how long, maybe a couple of years, maybe, head of the school. She was a ballet dancer and a mathematician out of Berkeley.
How about that?
Yeah, how about that?
Well, it looks like from the website, and I did take a look at that, it looks like they're still going strong.
Yes.
And like I said, in 2015, they celebrated 50 years.
Yes.
And a lot of really, really neat things going on. I'm just going to quote here what it said. The Hartford School of Arts celebrated 50 years in 2015 and 50,000 lives changed, having awarded more than $1.1 million in financial aid and scholarships. And it says, for the third consecutive year, Harlem School of Arts remains one of only 4 affiliate schools in the world to offer the American Ballet Theater National Ballet Curriculum to its dance students.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a pretty remarkable thing to be able to announce.
It is,
in their 50 years.
the ballet facilities is one of the, how to say, touchstones of the building when it was being built. It took the ballet out of the gymnasium at the St. James Church.
They were happy for that, I'm
Yes,
sure.
that's right. I should also point out that all of this activity was generated in no small part by the fact that Shelby Rooks was facing retirement in the 1970s, and he wanted to be able to leave to his successor at the church an unencumbered program. So he and Dorothy were, they're both in sync on that. Shelby, a lot of people tried to persuade Shelby not to cut the school loose, but building the building was going to have the opportunity for the school to be on its own without being beholden to the church. So the whole thing worked out quite well. And Shelby was very self-effacing about this. He couldn't be persuaded to stay on in the church. And I didn't try to weigh in on that particularly. I figured, that Shelby and Dorothy would do the right thing for what was right for them and for the school. And that was right. They did.
That's great. That's great. One more thing that I wanted to share on their current statistics, it says that some of the Hartford School of Arts children have starred on Broadway and off-Broadway productions and on television, including Sesame Street, The Lion King, Little Miss Sunshine, and have performed on tour with Bruno Mars.
Right.
The prep scholarship program students have been accepted to Clive Davis Institute for Music Moguls at New York University. So that's just some of the things that have, some of the many good students that have come out of.
Those are all more recent byproducts, long after I'd left.
Yeah.
But it's nice to know that it still has vitality in that way and has the esteem of the community that bespeaks.
Yeah, I need to make a correction. I think I said Hartford, didn't I? Did I say Hartford School of? So it's Harlem, of course, not Hartford.
Right.
I'm here in Connecticut.
Oh.
So are there other nonprofits that you were involved with, or was most of your time with nonprofits spent with the Harlem School of the Arts?
Well, yes. Principally at Harlem School of the Arts.
Okay.
But another one that I was involved with in music was the New York Choral Society, and Martin Josman, who founded the Messiah Sing-Ins at Philharmonic Hall, A.V. Fisher Hall, or whatever it's called today. I don't know, lost track. But anyway, that was, again, how to say it, it didn't have the same, how to say, bricks and mortar aspect to it. It was more performance and what could be done and where. And Martin Josman was a very capable, and is a very capable conductor. and has built up a legendary, career of Messiah sing-ins. Actually, he copyrighted, I think, or that term.
Okay. All right.
So I was with Martin for a few years on that.
Oh, that's great. Let me ask you another question. Where
Sure.
did you find the most fulfillment, in your for-profit work or your non-profit work?
I can't answer that.
You can't.
I'm sorry. I mean, the for-profit work kept me fed.
That's right. That's
So,
right.
The not-for-profit work did not.
Would you do it again, with being involved with the Harlem School of the Arts?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Most definitely.
Yes, clearly. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself a philanthropist?
No.
No.
No. I mean, the time I gave willingly and with enthusiasm.
Great.
It was rewarding to me to be doing it while it was happening, and I was ennobled and enlightened because I was listening to people asking questions of Dorothy, probing about how she was going to deal with one issue or another, and she was always ready for the answers.
Are you in touch with any students that you might have come in contact with while you were at?
No, nobody knows who I am.
Okay, you were kind of in the behind the scenes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
definitely.
My name doesn't appear any place that I'm aware of. It's
Yeah.
a school.
Yeah, that's. I can understand that. So, what advice do you have for people who might want to support a cause that they are passionate about?
Well, make yourself known, and no job is too small. You learn and you develop out of the smallest details. Matter of fact, I gave a little lecture once to the law firm, my law firm, after I was away for a couple of years. I went back, and one of my partners asked me to speak to the new lawyers, and my message was this: that there isn't any job that's really too small or insignificant if it's worth doing at all. And my example was that I had undertaken, when I was still wet behind the ears as a new lawyer, doing what's called mortgage review. And that is that I took over a process at the firm that involved reviewing mortgages and to see whether they were, up to snuff for purposes of being purchased by our clients, principally the Bowery, but not exclusively. There was also Manhattan Savings Bank and Bank for Savings and Knickerbocker Savings and Loan. But anyway, those are all now deceased. But at any rate, that experience led to my developing, with help, a program of mortgage sales, which you would now recognize as Ginnie Mae, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, all of those organizations.
Wonderful.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you, Stuart, for being with us today. I'm so glad to have this opportunity to find out a little bit more about you and your passion for specifically for being a part of the Harlem School of the Arts.
Well, Paul, I'm delighted to be here and delighted to tell you whatever I know, and in fact, in this case, more than what I know.
Well, it was a joy being with you here today. Thank
Likewise.
you so much.
Right,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
And I want to thank you, our listeners and viewers, for watching today. And I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean for the Nonprofit World. And I want to encourage you to find your passion, embrace your passion, and make a difference in the life of someone today. Have a wonderful day.